Well, hello. I got a great episode today. We talked about it was coming, but before we get to that, I want to do a quick little tasting. I just let it expire, but I had been a member of the Scotch Whisky Society of America, which is a portion of the Scotch Whisky Society of, you got it, Scotland. It's not an of Scotland. Anyway, I purchased a number of bottles. You have to become a member to purchase their bottles. It's a whole thing. We'll talk about it later. Nonetheless, this is a very high level of alcohol. It's 57.8%. So another rule, if we hadn't talked about it before, whiskey has to have at least 40% alcohol by volume to be Scotch whiskey. So this is 57%. It's insanely potent. So this stuff can hit you hard. And there's a lot of reasons for that, and we can talk about it another time. Bottom line was, I wanted to give this a try. I had it open earlier, and I wanted to give it a try and talk about it because it's one of the few whiskeys that I've tasted where when I give it a nice smell, all right, it actually doesn't smell way too appetizing. Usually almost every whiskey that I drink or have tried smells pretty good to me. They don't all taste fantastic. But this one actually says kind of go away a little bit. It's really a strong thing. And the reason I wanted to have that conversation was when I first tasted it, and I still have this experience now, when I taste it versus smell it, it comes alive and alters. And I haven't had that many experiences like that. But because this is a 57% alcohol by volume, here's where you can give it a little bit more than that little water, because you really want to bring that down a bit. That much alcohol, and a number of these, in fact, I think I may have given it a little too much water, so we may have to give it a wee bit more whiskey. So we're going to do that right now here. A little bit more. There we are. That much alcohol is quite standard. In fact, for the Whiskey Association, this might be a lower level volume. Okay? Anyway, so it's got first of all, the water will take away some of the harshness, but it has just a really strong wood and harsh smell to it that you kind of like, ooh, do I even want to try this? And I'm not talking about the harsh blends that people drink straight and people go, whoa, the fire coming out of their mouth. Just kind of like go away. But you taste this thing, and you can see the coloring too. It even looks like a white wine. You don't get that too often. I mean, they do exist. It's a younger whiskey, which does not explain everything, because here I've got that 9-year Lagavulin we talked about before, and this is an 11-year, and that has a lot to do with the type of wood that it was put into. This was put into and I still need my glasses. This was put into an ex-bourbon. So, I don't know. They must have really done a good job in cleaning out those barrels beforehand for another discussion. Anyway, when I was thinking about tonight's episode, I was not quite sure what direction, because we want to do some education, or at least talk about the process. Do we do linear? Do we start with the water, the location, the barley? How do we do this, right? What is a malt, right? I thought I'd go to somewhat in the middle of the process, which is, well, let me ask you this. What does yogurt, wine, bread, and scotch have in common? They're all fermented. So fermentation is the miracle of nature. It gives and gives and gives, and we enjoy and we enjoy and enjoy. So we need yeast, and we need sugar, and we need some water, okay? And the yeast is a single-cell fungus. Does the type of yeast that you use, because there's a ton of them, more than 4, probably like 4,000 or something, might be 4 million for all I know. Does the type of yeast that you use matter? Absolutely it does. And does it have an impact on taste? Absolutely it does. In Scotland, it's interesting. They use just a very small variety of yeast, generally. And back in the 60s, they actually used brewer's yeast, right? So they were making beer. The same stuff they're making to brew beer, they're using the same yeast. And it's a very similar process for beer, to a point, of course, until the distillation comes in. And then they moved to baker's yeast, and now they use some specialized super yeast. It has a series, an M series of something like that. It's also interesting that while in Scotland they don't give a lot of attention to the yeast for the flavor, whereas say in the United States and in Japan, it has a major impact. It's a major contributor to the flavor. So that's kind of interesting to me on two levels. One, you've got the Japanese whiskeys that are it's a Scottish inspired approach to whiskey, and there's a great history. I learned a little bit about it, about the gentleman who started that in World War II. He had come from Scotland, had married a Scottish woman, brought her back to Japan, and I think during the war tried to get the whiskey industry going. So it's a Scottish approach to whiskey with a Japanese flair. But one of the differences that they do is they really play around with the different types of yeast to get different flavor profiles. So in Scotland, we've got a narrower profile from the yeast, that is, not from other things, but from the yeast. And they're just now beginning to explore a lot more. So it should be interesting to see what comes down the pike. All right, so anyway, we have a special guest today to discuss the fermentation process. I was looking at photosynthesis. I thought about this when I was in school and brought up the little sunshine and the rays and it turns light and water and air into carbon dioxide and vice versa and all that stuff. It's confusing. I looked in fermentation, it looked just as confusing. So I had to go to a professional. I went to a guy who studied biology, he studied chemistry, and he's our guy. He's a friend of the show, great guy. So in an earlier recorded segment, I'd like to introduce everybody to Jeff London. Jeff, take it away, please. Let's start the interview, please. Roll it. Okay, so we're here now with our special guest that I just talked about, Jeff. And Jeff, you're going to help us learn about the miracle of fermentation. So if you just want to take a couple minutes, our audience would appreciate that.
Sure, Stu. I'm happy to be your first. I think I'm your first official guest.
You are our first guest.
The check hasn't yet arrived, but I know you're a gentleman, so I'm not worried about that.
That's right.
I'm happy to do this partly as a public service, because when Stuart asked me to do it, he told me he'd been studying photosynthesis, which has nothing to do with fermentation. Fermentation, pretty basic for anyone who's paid attention, Stuart. Fermentation is yeast. And
sorry, to be fair, I was just making a note that I think your dog could use some whiskey. I was going to save that joke for the end.
We've tried Prozac, Benadryl.
Wow.
Hi, Stuart.
The cannabinoids in high dose, nothing seems to happen.
All right, so anyway, I'm sorry.
But fermentation is the breakdown of sugar by yeast to make alcohol. I mean, that's the really simple approach. It's been around since the beginning of unicellular life on Earth. It was recorded 6,000 years BC by probably Phoenicians. I don't know who was back there then, but a long time ago. It was first understood by Louis Pasteur as it's the other side of pasteurization. You pasteurize things to get rid of bacteria and yeast, microorganisms, so that they don't spoil. Fermentation is kind of a form of spoilage that we've kind of corralled in to make something special. We make special spirits, special beer, special wine, but it's also part of, good example. No, I don't know if Corona is a good example, but it's an example.
Fermentation
is part of what helps bread to rise, and that even a little bit of alcohol is produced with that. It's what makes yogurt. It makes kombucha. Maybe we should not do that as often, but it's sauerkraut. Sauerkraut is fermented.
Is that right?
If to show you kind of the simple explanation, if we have slide number 1, I think I gave you the cassette of 40 slides that we're going to go through. This is slide number 1.
Yeah, let me share my screen here. Hold on 1 second.
Okay.
I know we need to do all this.
There it is. Sugar, yeast, fermentation. Here it's producing alcohol. It produces also carbon dioxide, which is what makes the bread puff up. It produces heat also, which is an important part of fermentation for Scotch. So
okay.
We could go on to the second slide, or second and third slide. Now this is the real story here.
Holy cow.
Yes.
It looks like the London Underground, the one on the right.
What I was going to say, the one on the left is kind of the inner workings of fermentation. We're not going to go through that in any meaningful way. The one on the right, you correctly identified it.
For our viewers to pause the video and go get a drink. Oh, look at that. Sorry, we've got a caller come in. Sorry, gotta go back.
Oh, we're going to take calls from the public? That's nice. The second one is, in fact, the Paris Underground. So I'm glad you appreciated that. Probably enough of the slides. Before we go away, the left side image is kind of the more complete image, and you can see it's like weeds growing out, or maybe like the bogs in Scotland growing out. Now we can get rid of the slides.
Okay, all right. Stop sharing the screen. You know, I just want, before you finish up, I came pretty close in setting that up. Glad I came to you because you are the professional. I did my own little sketch, and I came up with this. That's
you know what?
I was able to go.
I think
that's like the fermentation monster. I couldn't quite squeeze out any alcohol.
Okay, I think what's the so the simple part is sugar, yeast, alcohol, but what certainly when you pick up a bottle of 12-year Kuila, which is mildly peaty. Really good stuff. When you do that, you say there's something kind of special, subtle. There's 1,000 flavors. The aroma is there, and where fermentation gives you alcohol, things closer to what a vodka would taste like. This has more going on. That's because as the fermentation goes along, the yeast start to die out at the end, and other microorganisms that are there start to create other pathways, and that's why it's complicated. These are aromatic organic chemicals. Some of them are esters that are kind of in the solution. They give complex flavor that's you can't manufacture it. It's got to be done with nature, organically. And that's probably why putting a few drops of water it opens that up, lets the aromatics be hydrated. Some of them vaporize, the esters break apart. You get that great aromatic, flowery nature to it. And
I'm
it's
not sure about that portion. I just knew it happened, but I didn't.
I'm speculating. That's not from reading. That's just
what do facts matter?
A wild guess.
This is not about the.
I have other alternative facts that we could use too, but I think it's also the reason that most aficionados in whiskey say don't chill it, don't put it over ice, because you're doing the opposite. You're reducing volatility. You're reducing kind of the availability of some of those aromatic volatile compounds. So,
wow, you're hitting on a lot of good subjects. So these are all going to be future episodes.
I think that's wonderful.
I always thought it was box and box.
I do look forward to your going through the distillation process and the mull and the Todd and this and that. I skipped over as I did.
And the Tom, yeah, we'll have to do some of that later. All right, I had to cut that short because we went on and on for a while. And if you're still with us after, 15 minutes now, then you need a life, all right? Because if all you care about is whiskey, then I want to party with you, cowboy. To finish up, Jeff at the very end was saying some very important things. He calls it speculation. Damn it, I call it science. And the 2 points at the very end that I heard was a few drops of water opens up the aromatics. What was I saying from the very beginning? You got to put in a few drops. Not a lot of water, a few. Now, of course, again, if you've got a 60% alcohol by volume, you need more than a few drops. It's going to be way too strong. It's going to overwhelm. But we're not going to bring it down to 30. You know what I'm saying? All right. The second thing was, do not chill your whiskey. Do not chill it. Now, again, we're talking single malts. We're not making snow cones. No ice. All right? I drink with a lot of folks. They put ice in it all the time. Now, if you're in a very leisurely mode and you've got kind of a, I don't want to say a cheap scotch, a cheap single malt, they're just kind of hanging out and you want to have some volume and last and cool, and you're not really looking to totally immerse yourself in the flavoring, that's okay. If you're at a bar and you're hanging out with some people and you said, I just want to have a nice scotch or hang out, I don't want to go the single malt route like a Johnny Walker. It's kind of my go-to. A Johnny Walker Black, get it on the rocks. Not a problem. Let it last the evening. It's going to be good. It's going to taste fine. It's going to be sweet. It's almost going to be like an American whiskey, in my humble opinion, but that's fine. Okay? So thank you again, Jeff. Thank you for all of you that stayed with us. This is our longest episode yet. If you are still with me, then I need you on this program presenting something. I don't care if you're not an expert. We'll say that you are, all right? Jeff actually is an executive over at Waste Management. He's been doing that for 50 years. He doesn't know squat about any of this stuff. He's making up as he goes, as am I. So anyhow, we'll see you on the next episode of Whiskey with Stu. Have a great and safe weekend.